Well, we're going to get started. This is Pamela Passman. I'm joined by my colleague, Alan Dixon. Thank you very much for joining us. I know some of you are probably in some difficult weather, and we hope this is a good distraction from that. For those of you who don't know very much about CREATE, CREATE's mission is to share the leading practices on how to protect IP and prevent corruption in a practical, scalable, and cost-effective way. These are two separate issues, but represent two key enterprise risks for companies operating globally. We've chosen the topic today that is certainly at the top of the agenda for corporate boards of directors, C-suites, general counsels, compliance officers, chief information officers, CIOs, operations, and of course regulators. It crosses multiple legal responsibilities and many business functions in a company. And managing the cyber risk in a company requires a cross-functional that undertakes focused planning that is specific to a company's digital assets, business practices, corporate culture, and internal and external threats. CREATE has had an opportunity to work with companies around the world to build the internal management systems to protect their IP. Through this, the issue of trade secret theft continues to come up, and in that context, cyber-related risks. So we released a white paper on trade secret theft in May 2012 to raise awareness about the threats and to provide practical ways that companies could better protect their confidential information. That led to the development of CREATE leading practices for IP protection, which is based on the best practices of companies around the world on how to prevent counterfeiting, piracy, and trade secret theft. And then through that work, we found little economic analysis on trade secrets and little guidance on how to manage trade secrets. So we worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers and released a report in February of 2014 that helps companies build a case internally to invest in better securing their trade secrets. So all this work has given us some good insight into the issues around cyber risks. And certainly this issue has received quite a bit of attention over the last year and quite intensively over the last few months and weeks. And a variety of surveys are demonstrating that the number of incidences related cyber risk incidences has increased quite a bit year over year since 2009. One cybersecurity firm estimated that as many as 71% of compromises go undetected. So you have quite a bit of activity and a good deal of it is undetected. We wanted to set the context by thinking about the issue fairly broadly. While we focus on intellectual property and confidential information and trade secrets, the issue is really the digital assets that a company has. And we think the Sony incident really is a good way to think about what are your corporate digital assets. And for every company they're different. On the slide before you, we've tried to list what the press and Sony has talked about in terms of what kinds of information was compromised. And certainly, as I said, this will look different for every company. In the context of Sony, their products and services also happen to be a good part of their intellectual property. Their business plans were released. A whole host of trade secrets and other confidential and private information that was not intended for public release was in fact compromised. A huge amount of email from across the company, employee, PII, their banking information, medical, passports, social security numbers, performance reviews. A whole host of financial data that was not public was also released. And then, of course, information that they hold, that is their customers or vendors or other third-party proprietary confidential information, was also released. And in this context, it's because there's so much information that a company now keeps and stores, it's incredibly important to determine what is the most sensitive digital assets that a company has. so that those most sensitive assets can be better secured. And it's important not to treat all data equally, which makes, I think, a very strong argument for companies not to keep and store excess data. So as we talk through these issues, it will be important to think about how you would classify the internal data, the corporate digital assets of your company. How would you classify them? How would you determine what is most sensitive and most valuable, and what would need to receive the most attention to be kept secured? And it's important to not only think about your company's corporate digital assets, but your company is probably a supplier or vendor to other companies. What categories of this information do you hold that is owned by other companies? Today we're going to talk through this issue in a variety of ways, but we're not going to get into the need for incident response plans. But it will be critical that once you go through the process of identifying, categorizing, valuing, and securing your assets, you're going to need to have plans in place that anticipate the loss or breach of these assets to ensure your preparedness, and that you have a team and process to respond to the loss of your corporate digital assets. The next slide summarizes, in the Sony context, what have been the significant costs of a breach. We identified what was the IP or the corporate digital assets, which is quite significant. It'll be a long time, if ever, when Sony is able to fully measure the financial loss associated with IP and corporate digital assets. Certainly, as we've seen this play out in the press, its impact on reputation, relationships, the recruitment of not only employees, but the whole host of talent that Sony works with, other vendors, other suppliers. It will be quite significant and will play out over a number of years, no doubt. What's also been reported is that parts of Sony's business and operations just came to a standstill. Significant amounts of data were lost permanently, not just released, but lost. And of course, financial, legal, Sony recently had to delay its quarterly earnings report because it didn't have access to key financial data. So very, very significant impact on a company. What's also interesting is that, as I mentioned, so many of these incidences go unreported, or they're not even detected. We do see a reluctance on the part of companies to disclose that there has been a theft or there has been a loss, and there's a variety of reasons for this, competitive, regulatory, or reputation reasons. But it's often the company doesn't even know, and it doesn't become aware until a third party tells them that their data has been released. We're now going to take a look quickly at what are the greatest threats. Who are the actors, and why are they interested in your corporate digital assets, but also the environment in which all of this is happening. Why are we seeing so much activity, so much effort to obtain the corporate digital assets, to release the corporate digital assets, steal the corporate digital assets of companies? And certainly we're operating in a really hyper-competitive global marketplace, where suppliers, customers, competitors are in many different countries with different legal regimes and cultural norms. We've got a very complex and fragmented supply, distribution, and value chains. There's very limited follow-up to find out the capacity of business partners beyond the first tier. Relationships are usually based on contractual terms with very little or no sense of the capacity or capability of your business partners to actually protect and appropriately manage your digital assets. There's a very mobile workforce. Employees are spread out around the world. They're using multiple devices to access your network. Technical talent and other talent is changing jobs and companies frequently. And so it's a very dynamic marketplace where employees are coming in and out of companies at a pretty quick pace. And of course, the amount of information that's digitized. So much information can be stored at very low cost. So companies are not making the hard decision about what's most important to keep. And of course, it's so easy to move digitized information around. We're next going to turn to the cyber risk threat landscape. And across this environment, there are a number of threat actors acting for different gains. And all of these threat actors are looking at vulnerabilities with people, process, and technology to steal or release your corporate digital assets. And we see that the threat actors are often very sophisticated in assessing your physical and network vulnerabilities. And while we're going to focus on cyber threats today, which is a significant threat, there's also more traditional ways such as luring and threatening employees and trying to enter or photograph your facilities as a customer or a vendor to obtain your confidential information. But as we look down the list of threat actors, certainly we've read about a lot about nation states and hacktivists and others that are pretty sophisticated in accessing networks of organizations much beyond their borders, and they do it for a variety of reasons. Insiders, malicious insiders, we're going to come back to this topic, present probably the greatest threat to companies and organizations, as well as competitors, often preying on your employees and your vendors, but they're also presenting significant challenges, as well as organized crime. On the slide, you'll see a number of methods that threat actors use to penetrate your network, often through employees or third parties. Co-opting credentials is a vehicle and a method that we see quite often, and of course was involved to some extent in the Sony threat. We wanted to highlight the issue of malicious insiders, current and former employees, current and former business partners, because we repeatedly see that these present the greatest risk. As I mentioned, some are recruited by competitors or nation states, but various surveys have indicated that almost one-third of companies say that insider crimes are more costly or damaging than incidents perpetrated by outsiders. Another survey by Ernst & Young says 57% of respondents view employees as the most likely source of a cyber attack. And we're going to focus on malicious insiders, but certainly there's a lot that happens that's just as a result of human error. But this often goes back to a lack of process that's in place in a company to be preventative and proactive, so that employees see that it actually is quite easy to access information. There doesn't appear to be any hurdles or barricades to getting any kind of information that they want to get. In some cases, access controls might be in place, but policies are not implemented, and there's little follow-up when roles change. We see that bad guys will typically look for the weakest link, and often the most efficient and easiest way into a system. And the majority of the time, current employees and suppliers are the easiest way in. And we also wanted to highlight the issue of supply chain and vendor vulnerabilities. And given today's environment where so much information is shared and generated with business partners and suppliers, we see a lack of policies and due diligence regarding the third parties, regarding their ability to actually manage these issues. And more you're hearing that having a fortified castle or having a heavy fence around your operations, a very strong perimeter is no longer stable because your perimeter, your network will be penetrated. And so how you protect your digital assets inside of your company is really critical. And your third parties, your vendors and suppliers have access into your network. They are a bridge, a hole into your fortress. So the ability to ensure that they have the strongest processes in place, that they educate and manage their employees, that they are ensuring that their employees are subject to access controls and other limitations on their ability to access your information. We also see that while larger companies might be more effective in implementing security safeguards and in some cases better able to manage some of the cyber risks, there's an increased amount of assaults on what we call middle-tier companies or mid-sized companies who have not yet matured their cyber processes. And often small firms think they are too insignificant to attract threat actors when, in fact, they have become much more attractive as a vehicle inside to gain access inside of larger companies. And certainly the Target and Home Depot examples, where you had small and medium-sized companies as the means to gain a foothold into those retailers, is strong evidence of the need for your mid and small-sized suppliers and vendors to also have up-to-date practices. And I think we all appreciate that if companies do not get their arms around this issue, regulators will be more prescriptive about what companies need to do. So now we're going to share with you, based on our work with companies around the world, on a management systems approach that we think is most effective as you look at your corporate digital assets in total and your intellectual property and trade secrets confidential information specifically. So I'm going to hand it over to Alan.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. Can you hear me?
I think they can hear you, Alan.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'm ringing in from London, and I hear you all are under sort of a blanket of snow, so just want to be sure I'm reaching you. So, I mean, I think unless you've been in a cave for the last year or two, the company that you're working with, the companies you work with, probably have as one of their big priorities to try to deal with this whole issue of cybersecurity and protecting your digital assets. I mean, it's interesting, some of the studies that we've been involved in, the PricewaterhouseCoopers report that we have on our website that Pamela was referring to, is saying that cyber incidents of the kind we've been talking about basically are on the increase of about 66%, compound increase year on year. So this is just a huge problem for so many companies. And I was also noticing that McKinsey and the World Economic Forum put out some figures last year saying that of the companies they've surveyed, about 94% total would say they're still developing their systems to deal with cybersecurity and cyber threats of these kinds. So this is a huge priority, I know, for many of your companies. And I guess the temptation is, I mean, I'm a lawyer by profession, and the clients and the companies I deal with tend to look at these things as just an IT problem sometimes. And we've got a security breach. How do we deal with the IT security? They're in our emails, they're in our confidential files, they're looking at our trade secrets. But I think the thing that we have been seeing and talking about, and what we're showing you here, is that this is not just an IT problem. The question really is for companies, how do you manage the whole range of relevant functions in your company that come into play in protecting against cyber incidents, cyber theft? Things like, as Pamela was saying, not just who can get access externally, but who has access internally to a whole range of different kinds of things. Things like, how do your policies, how do your agreements you have with your suppliers, your employees, people that you're dealing with, manage and inform the people that you're dealing with of how they're supposed to and how they can promote cybersecurity in a whole range of ways. And as Pamela mentioned, this isn't just an internal problem. This is also one that comes up with suppliers. And the Target situation really was one where one of Target's vendors, who was apparently simply just using the Target electronic invoicing system to put in invoices, there was a security compromise there, and through that, one would have thought completely innocent and probably safe loophole, that's where the target security breach happened. So really there's a whole range of things we're going to be sort of outlining and showing you that you need to be thinking about when you're talking about managing your company against IT and digital cybersecurity threats. Those of you that have fairly sophisticated management systems approaches know that, basically doing things ad hoc is less likely to lead to reducing risks of this kind than doing this in a systematic way. And so approaching these things from what's been called a management systems approach, I know a number of your companies have a very detailed management system approach, is really a much more effective way of dealing with this than just sort of whack-a-mole, which is sometimes what we do in this area of cybersecurity. It's really a matter of building this into your everyday business operations, putting protections in place where they need to be in place in all of the areas that are relevant to cybersecurity. And we've put on the slide, of course, building awareness, making sure people know what they're supposed to do. Again, some of the companies we've talked to and looked at in some of our Create independent valuations, the companies that the suppliers have been dealing with have no idea what the suppliers are doing, and the suppliers have no idea sometimes what your expectations are as the owner of particular secrets or the operator of particular kinds of email or security systems. So building awareness not only through the company but also with your suppliers is hugely important for reducing risk. Again, communicating clear expectations. What do you expect your employees to be doing? What do you expect your suppliers to be doing? And really to try to be ahead of the game, being proactive here rather than just responding to incidents. And one of the good things we're seeing as well is that people can build these kinds of cybersecurity, digital asset protections into their management systems and not have to reinvent the wheel. Again, I think sometimes we look at cybersecurity, we look at protecting digital assets as an entirely different animal to the thing that we do every day in other areas. But if you think about what you're doing with your suppliers in quality systems, what you're doing in your internal operations with respect to physical security, policies that you have in place for different kinds of information management can be extended to many of the same systems, many of the same groupings of departments within the company, many of the same mechanisms of management support can be used to also address the system of cybersecurity and digital asset management. Again, I know a lot of you probably have enterprise risk management as a sophisticated operation in your company. It's surprising how many companies use enterprise risk management in a limited way, though. And for small and medium-sized companies, this may be just a completely alien concept. But basically, it's the idea of having the risks that you're trying to deal with, including these kinds of cyber risks that we're talking about, identified ahead of time. Then assessing how serious these risks are. So not just what's the likelihood of them happening, but also what's the damage going to be if these things do happen. And then prioritizing the risk that you're facing and setting out specific steps that you're going to take in the different areas of your management system to reduce those risks to a level and in ways that you're comfortable with as a company. So enterprise risk management obviously can be used for any kinds of corporate risks. it's kind of flavor for the month in many companies at the moment. But in this area of cybersecurity, particularly, more specifically in corporate digital assets breach, that's a risk people are recognizing, and particularly, and we're going to look at a little bit more detail in the area of trade secrets or IP theft, but particularly in IP theft, there are steps that you can take to identify what are the likely risks to your trade secrets, to your proprietary information. How serious are those? If that kind of stuff goes out the door, what's the likely cost to you? How likely is it that these things are going to be stolen or leaked? And then once you've got your head around the specifics of what your risks are, how likely, which ones are your priority ones, then what exactly are you going to do in these various areas that are relevant in your company to manage against those risks, to really try to reduce the chance that these things can happen. These three are very standard, as you all who deal with ERM know, very standard steps of ERM, but ones that make a lot of sense as you're trying to get your arms around the security risks and the cyber protections that you may need. I want to focus a little bit on this area of trade secrets. As I say, Create has done some really helpful reports, I think, on several aspects of this whole area of applying management system solutions to protecting intellectual property, to protecting trade secret theft, and of course, the risk of cyber incidents is a major risk to trade secrets at the moment. We did this study with PricewaterhouseCoopers last year, looking at the economic trade secrets economic impact of trade secret theft, and Pamela's talked you through a bit of the kind of the approach here of looking at key threat actors. Who's likely to be trying to get into your systems, take your digital assets, compromise your trade secrets? And the report goes into more detail, which we don't have time to here, but of some of these scenarios that Pamela was talking about, of the kinds of risks you may face. And obviously, depending what kind of business and industry your company is in, or your group is in, the threat actors will vary. The kinds of things that may be leaked or could be stolen will be different. But this report really sets out an ERM, enterprise risk management structure for thinking about the kinds of risks you may have to your trade secrets theft. We've put the web's address on here, but if you look on the Create website, this and our other reports are available. So really, again, this is sort of a different way of looking at this, but this is really still the question of identify, assess, and manage. So what do you need to protect is a hugely important question. Now it's interesting, having worked as a lawyer for a long time, I think we as lawyers tend to think, let's just do a general blanket contract that covers everything, right? Let's say you will keep all our secrets secret. We're not going to say which ones they are. We're not going to actually think about which secrets we might be trying to keep secret sometimes. And we do our contract and we put it in the drawer, and we sit in our office and hope nothing bad happens. And if it does, we go see the police, or we take a lawsuit, or we respond, we react. But this question of what it is that you're protecting, particularly in this area of trade secrets, is so important. What are your crown jewels that if they were stolen from your company, or if they were leaked out, or if they were left in a briefcase on the train? We have this in England a lot, actually. Our government ministers take important things and keep confidential information in their briefcase and then leave them on the trains. We have this sometimes. But what is it in your company that's your crown jewels that you must protect. What intellectual property or trade secrets or other company material, maybe you're a supplier, what valuable information of other people are you managing in some way? Do you have access to or do you have control over that you need to be protecting? So really sitting down and doing what Pricewaterhouse here calls a prioritized ranked list of trade secrets is hugely important to this process, because you can have all kinds of general systems or contracts or things that look on the surface like they're managing what you want to do. But once you think, actually what we're trying to protect is X trade secret, or this particular bit of information that Y company has given us, and you think back through the protections you have in place, there may be gaps that you've never thought of. So really designing these kind of contracts, IT systems, all the kinds of steps you might be wanting to take really need to start with figuring out, okay, so what trade secrets are we thinking about? What private data, or what emails between our stars and our movie studio moguls. What are the things that we really need to keep protected, and then build your systems with that knowledge firmly in mind. The Pricewaterhouse study also looks in great detail, and we're not going to look at this here, but at the ways that you can assess the cost and the likelihood of a problem. And again, I think some companies are very concerned. Gosh, I'm going to spend so much money on my IT system and 18 other different things internally to try to beef up cybersecurity, let's say. But another hugely useful tool from ERM that it is well worth using is, as PwC has explained in this report, looking at, okay, what is the actual likelihood that somebody's going to break into our system? What is the likelihood that this particular kind of information or data or whatever the cyber asset is, what's the chance that this is going to be taken? And taking an educated estimate of that. And then having a hard think about, all right, so if that is stolen, if my latest film, unreleased film leaks out, or if my secret formula to my product or my know-how with respect to the things I'm providing online, or whatever it is, if that particular asset got leaked out or stolen, what would be the real financial and other impact to my company? So taking these into account, then one can say, okay, well, it's a low likelihood but a really high cost if it happens, or a high likelihood and a low cost that it happens, or any combination of those. So again, assessing the cost, assessing the risk is a really important part of this process. And then, of course, the last thing, which we like to jump to, I think, sometimes is, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? So this is the PwC sort of let's say ERM, risk management process, and we're going to focus for the next few minutes really on this last one of, once you've gone through your identify and assess discussion and analysis, then what kinds of things should you be thinking about doing? What kinds of things should you put in place to reduce the risk, to manage the risk in these areas? So Create.org has been working with ERM and with this kind of risk management since it started, and certainly in the intellectual property area, and that includes trade secrets. We have done a lot of discussion with a huge number of companies. We have consulted with PricewaterhouseCoopers, obviously, and other firms that do this on a daily basis. We have had any number of self-assessment and independent evaluations in our service that companies have done with us. and have put together what we think is really a great framework for thinking about what we call leading practices. What areas of management systems ought to be looked at, ought to be taken into consideration when you're trying to deal with not just trade secret and IP protection, but really all kinds of cybersecurity, trying to get your head around managing the risk better to your digital assets in your company. The 8 areas in these leading practices you can see on the screen if you're connected, and I won't go through all these in detail, but just very briefly, again, it's not just IT. If you look down at the bottom left box, security and confidentiality management is where we get into the IT systems, the IT particular things that should be looked at and done when you're trying to secure and protect your digital assets. But even there, security and confidentiality management goes beyond digital security. There are physical security issues that absolutely affect the IT security that you have. If you have the best IT security in the world, but anybody can walk in off the street and take information off your system, then you still have a problem with, let's say, cybersecurity, if you hear what I'm saying. So the whole area of IT and physical security are obviously hugely important, and companies need to look at that. And again, we'll talk a bit more about that. But that's not the only place that needs to be looked at. If you look at, we'll go back to the top box here, but policies, procedures, and records. What policies do you have in place with your employees? What contracts do you have with your employees? What kind of procedures and contracts and policies do you have with your suppliers on these kind of issues? And again, sometimes these are very specific and detailed, but I have to say a lot of the ones I've seen are very skimpy. And so this is an area that really can benefit from some review, some work, and from some risk management steps. The second one really is who deals with this in your company. The truth is, if nobody's dealing with it, if nobody has responsibility for it, it's not being managed. And again, I think sometimes we look at these things and we think, well, we have an IT manager, they're dealing with it. But if there are at least 8 different areas of things that need to be managed, well, the IT manager probably isn't managing all of them. So having a team, having a clear responsibility for who's overseeing your cybersecurity, and have all of the groups in the company that touch that involved is hugely important. Risk assessment is the next one we've been talking about, just applying your risk management processes to this whole area. Supply chain, again, where a lot of the leaks happen. Training and capacity building. Again, I've talked to suppliers who have no idea. It's in the contract. They've signed a contract with you saying they'll do all these things. But even sometimes the people that are signing this with you have no idea what they're supposed to do with your trade secrets or with your security systems. I had an interesting discussion with a supplier, I won't tell you what country, that was getting plans, drawings, secret drawings from their customer about what kinds of parts should be manufactured by this vendor, and what kinds of it was in the contract. This all had to be kept secret, only accessed by the particular people that were working on this project. Well, it turns out that the plans were on every single machine around their company. They were on paper. Anybody could have access, and any of them could go out the door without any kind of controls whatsoever. So really training, capacity building, things beyond just signing a piece of paper with the employer or the supplier saying this is what we need to do. And of course, ongoing monitoring and measurement, not just put the piece of paper in the drawer, but follow up, what's happening, how's this working, can we make this better next year? All these kind of very normal management system things can really have a benefit in this whole area of cybersecurity. I'll quickly pop through a couple of specific areas that you might find of interest if you look at our reports, or if you want to talk to us about this further. We've got in the latest paper we released on this issue at Create, which is called Protecting Intellectual Property Through Enterprise Risk Management. We released this last autumn. There's a couple of sample forms that might be useful for you, and we tried to make them useful for small companies as well as big companies. But things about getting your inventory of IP down, which is the thing you see in the top left here. What kinds of IP do you have in these different areas that you want to protect? Who owns them? Who's got access to them internally? What suppliers are dealing with it? Which customers may have access? Kind of getting your arms around what IP might be subject to risks. What cybersecurity risk might apply in some cases here to trade secrets, let's say. And then we've also put in here a sample worksheet of the kinds of risks that a lot of companies face in each of these areas. So just some sample things that might be helpful for you to look at is, okay, I have a trade secret of a certain kind of formula. Let's go to the risk identification. What kinds of risk might apply to that formula, let's say. So really very practical ways of thinking about identifying and assessing the risks that your IP and other digital assets might be subject to can be analyzed and managed. And then the other one I just wanted to show you here was the whole IT security thing, and that is, again, I think sometimes our IT systems, I think often, frankly, our IT systems are expected to protect things that when they were designed, these systems, they were never intended to protect, they were never designed to protect. And so if you think that among the Fortune 20 companies, these guys are identifying in their SEC filings, we have cybersecurity risks. Here they are. But in addressing those risks, a lot of times what happens is, the systems are put in place. Maybe you want to join the ISO 27001 standard. You want to comply with COBIT or NIST standards in IT security. But these standards say basically you need to design your security with your objectives in mind. And so designing your security systems with the objective of specifically protecting the IP, the trade secrets, the digital assets that you own and value most is really a huge part of enterprise risk management, which if you miss that step, if you forget that you're trying to protect particular things, your systems won't be nearly as robust. And with that, I think, Pamela, I'll turn back over to you.
Thanks very much, Alan. We just have a few more slides, and then we'd like to open it up if anyone has any questions. There's a chat function at the bottom of the screen where you can also ask questions. But just wanted to summarize, Create leading practices for IP protection. It has a variety of phases to help companies understand what processes and systems they have in place to manage these issues, first through a self-assessment and then through an independent evaluation. We're able to provide a roadmap that shows you where your gaps are, and through the guide that we provide and training and other activities help you mature your systems over time. And the approach that Alan talked about, while focused on IP and trade secrets, really enables you to focus on those corporate digital assets that are most sensitive to your company. We also wanted to highlight that on our website we've got a number of resources for companies. Alan mentioned the recent report that we released, Protecting IP Through Enterprise Risk Management, and a number of tools are in that white paper. The trade secret report that we did with PricewaterhouseCoopers, as well as the initial trade secret white paper that we did. And we've also posted some model policies that companies could have in place in their employee handbook or in their vendor, or supplier code of conduct that focuses on trade secrets, we also have a broader set of model IP policies on our website as well. And we just wanted to summarize the importance of your company identifying cybersecurity as part of your enterprise risk management approach. I think you're seeing and hearing this from a variety of sources as well as from regulators. And then identifying what those risks are, and in particular the greatest risks to your corporate digital assets. Certainly a cyber incident can just bring down the whole company. But more realistically, it will be targeted on specific corporate digital assets, both the theft and just the elimination or loss of them. As well as then managing within the context of corporate digital assets. There's many different kinds of assets. How do you manage the likelihood and severity of a breach of each of those different types of corporate digital assets? We focus today on trade secrets and IP and ensuring that you manage that issue in particular. But again, for your company, there may be different corporate digital assets that you would prioritize. There are a few questions that have come up. First question, can you provide an assessment of just one area, for instance, what's happening and what's being done around supply chain partners? Alan, I know you gave a few examples of that. Would you like to take that one on?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, thanks very much. So, it's interesting. We have had such a varied and this varies so much by company and by industry. I can give you an example and then just tell you a little bit of kind of where we the types of things that we've been talking to companies about and looking at. So obviously with supply chains, the contracts are important. The policies that you have on various things, including trade secrets, are hugely important. Some companies have the just have the contractor sign or have the supplier sign the company's own policies, let's say. I'm trying to think of particular examples. We've talked to some suppliers who have better policies in place than their customer. I was very surprised to hear an Indian company that I was talking to had done some hugely creative things in the IT security space. And so whereas the multinational company that asked us to do this work with them had done some general things in their contract and said, be sure you keep our secrets confidential internally. This Indian supplier had done a very sophisticated IT system where only the people working on that contract internally could get access to that particular data from the multinational. The employees had to have particular training, which is another area, on IP, on protecting IP, at least once a year, or they would be locked out of the computer system and couldn't even send emails. They had a very sophisticated internal system for, making sure that access was limited to the customer's sensitive data, and then ways of catching that. I'm not sure if it was a technical tag or something that if somebody tried to email that out of the organization, that the system would catch that. So those are the types of things. I don't know if there's anything particularly that you wanted to talk about with respect to the supply chain, but there's a whole range of things that we can talk about. But yeah, those are the ones that strike me.
We also see that companies are now asking their suppliers to educate and train their employees on these issues. for many companies, many multinationals, when new employees join a company, they go through a training related to confidential information and trade secrets. But they find that their suppliers or other third parties do not train their employees as they join the company, or as they leave the company. They don't necessarily engage in an exit interview with their employees to ensure that they understand their ongoing responsibility not to disclose information from the company they're leaving. So we're seeing more and more in that, where multinationals are being more specific with their key third parties on the kind of training that they'd like their suppliers to do with their employees.
And just to add to that, Pamela, all of the 8 areas that we talked about, so policies, procedures, and records, risk management, compliance teams, risk assessment, all the kinds of things that we've been talking about that are of value with your own company are ones that need to be thought about with your suppliers. And these are the types of things we're giving examples of here.
We also have a question about how vulnerable P2P processes are, including e-invoicing and e-tendering. Great question. I think many of you are aware of the breach that both Target and Home Depot went through that involved third parties. And one, as reported in the press, involved an HVAC company that simply had access to the retailer's network to submit invoices. And through that vehicle, its credentials were hijacked, and access into the retailer was achieved by the bad guys. So I think that's the gist of your question. If it's not, please refine it. But clearly, third parties having access into your network for a variety of reasons can easily, as we've seen in multiple times, be used by threat actors wanting to gain access. And it's simply an employee in your company inside of the network, clicking onto a spam or malware that also brings in bad third parties, bad actors. So it is, the challenge that we have is that these systems enable us to collaborate, to communicate in a variety of ways that drives efficiencies and drives the kinds of collaborations that we want inside of companies and with our key third parties, but ensuring that our employees and our third parties are very much aware of how their actions can impact the company, that there are clear processes in place and ways of ensuring that those processes are being followed. Are there any other questions? We very much appreciate your participation with us today. If you have any questions, you can reach us each with our email addresses on the screen or info@create.org. And again, I urge you to check out the resources that we have on our website that are available to help you guide you through this very challenging situation. Thanks very much. Have a great day.